All right, guys, so today we're going to take a look at random sampling. So we've talked about bad samples and how to end up with samples that are biased, and today we're going to kind of shift gears and talk about how to get samples that aren't as biased. And basically the best way to do that is to make sure that your sample is representative. And one way to do that without kind of hand picking to make sure you have every group represented is to select randomly. Because presumably if I were to number everybody in the population and then choose random numbers to be part of my sample, it would be very unlikely that I would end up with a biased sample. So today we're going to talk about ways that we can take random samples, and we're going to start with sort of the most basic one, which is called a simple random sample. And the way that it works is you are going to number your population. So number all members of a population. And then you're going to use some sort of random process involving chance to choose the sample. So use a random process that involves chance to choose the sample. The sample. And basically the way that that's going to work is like this. So let's say that I was looking at your particular class. If I wanted to take a random sample of students from your class, if I numbered you all from 1 to 38 or however many of you there are, it's very unlikely that if I were to choose 5 numbers randomly, they would all give me students who are on the water polo team. That's pretty unlikely. And that's because I'm choosing randomly. I'm not actually choosing myself at all. I'm using chance to choose. And so random selection doesn't guarantee that we're going to get a perfectly representative sample, but it certainly helps drive us in that direction. So, all right, I number everybody in my population. I use a random chance process to choose the sample. Well, what do you mean by a random process? Well, there's a few different random processes that we use, but our main one we use is actually a random number table, which is exactly what it sounds like. We also can use a random number generator, which your calculators all have. And then you can even use really basic stuff. So for example, any classroom with popsicle sticks. When your teacher chooses a popsicle stick for a volunteer to do something in class, that's taking a simple random sample. So you could use things like popsicle sticks, slips of paper, just to introduce some chance into your selection. You could even do dice. There are such things as 40 or 50-sided die, and you can roll those die. You would end up with a number on top, and then that corresponding person would be chosen for your sample. And then if you're choosing between 2 outcomes, you can even flip a coin. So flipping a coin. There's just a lot of different ways you can take a random sample, but as I said, we are going to, in this class, focus mainly on the random number table because the AP test focuses on that. So basically, whenever you're going to be asked to take a random sample or choose random numbers on an AP test, they're going to give you all a random number table because they need you all to choose the same random numbers. And as you're going to see on a calculator, your calculators all spit out different random numbers depending on something called a random seed. So to ensure that you all get the same thing, they have you use a random number table. You all should have the random number table from a textbook that I use. It should say table D on top. And it is literally a table with a bunch of random digits on it. I'm stealing digits from line 101 from that table, and I'm going to sort of show you how these work. So here's the example. Brisa wants to choose 5 students at random to complete 5 problems on the board. There are 37 students in her class. And so I'm going to show you how to use a random number table, but I'm also going to write down the steps I'm doing because that's what you're going to be asked to do on the AP test. They're going to say, hey, how would you choose a random sample of numbers? And they literally want a list of instructions. So that's what I'm going to do. So to begin, we are going to start by, there are 37 students in my class. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is number those students from 1 to 37. So you can do this in bullet point form. I'm going to write this as a paragraph, but when you're actually doing this yourself, feel free to bullet point it. That's totally fine. So first, number all students from 1 to 37. Okay. We want to end up choosing 5 different students. And so the way we're going to do this with a random number table is I'm going to look at my highest number. So if I'm numbering from 1 to 37, 37 would be my highest number. And that particular number, 37, has 2 digits, the 3 and the 7. So that means what I'm going to have to do is I am going to be underlining the numbers in the random number table 2 digits at a time. So for example, when I underline the first 2 digits, that represents number 19. My next 2 digits represent number 22, etc. So we will underline 2 digits at a time. Since our largest number, and I'm writing this for your benefit, I wouldn't actually have you write this on a test, so give me a second here. So we will underline 2 digits at a time. I'm going to put a period there, and then in parentheses, I'm just explaining this to you. When you're doing this on your homework or on a quiz or on a test, I would not expect you to write what I'm about to write in parentheses. And that's since our largest value, 37, has 2 digits. Okay. So we will underline our numbers 2 digits at a time. Okay. And then I'm going to say what those 2 digits represent. The 2 digits will represent the students that we've numbered. So for example, 1, 5, 15 will represent student number 15. So I've numbered all my students from 1 to 37. I'm underlining 2 digits at a time on this table. I'm saying what the digits actually represent, and you have to do that. And then now we're going to talk about how specifically we're going to do this and what do we do if we get numbers that aren't between 1 and 37, etc. So let's actually look at the numbers that we do have. The first number I have, and I'll write this in different color. We'll go blue. Why not? So the first number I have is 19. Next number I have is 22. Well, I'm going to keep underlining, and I'm underlining 2 digits at a time, even though there's a space between. And so that next number I have is 39. Okay, well, that's not between 1 and 37, so I'm going to go ahead and actually ignore that 39. My next number I have is 50. Again, that's not between 1 and 37, so I'll be skipping that. 34 would be next. 05 would be student number 5. I'm skipping 75. I'm skipping 62. I'm skipping 87. And then my final number that I'm going to have is going to be 18. So I have 19, 22, 34, 5, and 18. So that's what I end up with for this particular sample. And so I'm going to go through now and actually explain what I did, and then I'm also going to talk about one more detail, and then that'll be it. So I've underlined 2 digits at a time. 15 represent student number 15. So now I'm going to say, okay, choose a row on the random number table, which I already did because I printed it out for you. So in this case, my row that I'm looking at is 101. And then I'm going to say, okay, so choose a row at the random number table, underline digits 2 at a time. I already wrote this, but I'm going to do it again. And I'm skipping numbers that are less than 1. And I know you're like, okay, well, what number is less than 1? Well, in theory, you could have 2 zeros next to each other, and that would actually be the number 0. So we're we're looking at digits 2 at a time. We will skip values less than 1, so less than 0, 1, and larger than 37. We also have to talk about one more thing. It's perfectly possible for me to get a repeated value. And so in this case, I ended up with 19, 22, 34, 5, and 18. None of those are repeated. But what if I had ended up with, for example, 2 22s? Do I include both of those as part of my sample? And to answer that question, it depends on context. So in this case, I want 5 students to complete 5 different problems on the board. So presumably, I would like those 5 students to be 5 different students. So if I get a repeated number, I'm going to, in this case, go ahead and skip it. So I'm going to mention that. That is very important. So I'm going to say skip repeated numbers. And then I'm going to finally say, well, I need 5 people for this sample, so I'm going to keep picking digits until you have 5 unique students. Okay, and then so in this case, the students that we ended up picking, so students for sample, were student number 19, 22, 34, 5, and 18. Okay, so as far as when you're actually writing out an explanation, you pretty much need most of this. I did repeat a little bit, but you need to make sure that you say first number all your students from 1 to 37. And then you need to basically say this entire paragraph. Finally, you need to mention somewhere, and I put it up here, what each number represents explicitly. Okay? So that's how a random number table works. And that's how you would sort of describe it. Now, you might be asked to use a random number table. In other situations, you might actually be asked to explain how you would use slips of paper to choose a random sample. And that's pretty much exactly what you think it would be. So what I would like you to do now is for the same situation, Brissette is trying to pick 5 students out of her 37 to complete problems on the board. I would like you to write out an explanation for how you would do that with slips of paper. So actually pause this video, actually write an explanation, and then once you're done, I will have written up the explanation. You can check it out, see if it matches with mine, and then we'll move on to a random number generator. Okay. So your explanation may be more or less detailed than mine, but I'll talk again about certain things you need to have. So for slips of paper, you gotta either number every kid in the room, and you can put numbers on slips of paper, that's fine. That's sort of a middle step, so I cut that out and I just said, you know what, let's just write students' names on equal sized slips of paper. Why equal sized? Well, obviously it's not fair if one kid has like an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and everybody else has little like strips, because I'm of course more likely to pick the one kid in a giant piece of paper. So I have equal size slips of paper. I'm putting these pieces of paper into a bag and I'm mixing them. That's actually silly, but it's kind of key. You need to make sure these names are mixed, because if they're not, then you're sort of not really choosing randomly. You're probably most likely going to choose ones that are either on top or bottom, depending on where you stick your hand. So slips of paper into a bag, mix well. Pull out 5 slips of paper one at a time without replacing these slips of paper. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's kind of the same as repeating above. We didn't want repeated numbers because I need 5 different people for 5 different problems. In this case, if I pulled out a piece of paper, a slip of paper, and then I put that slip of paper back, if I replaced it, then I could call that kid again. And I don't want to do that. I'm just going to skip that kid. So the way to avoid that is I'm going to pull slips of paper one at a time, and I'm not going to replace them. I'm going to keep them outside of the bag. So in this case, you did sort of need to mention that. Or if you had the teacher put the slips of paper back in the bag, you can just mention that you're going to skip repeats. So either one of those options are fine. Okay. And then once you have 5 slips of paper, call the names of the students on these papers. This is your sample. Again, I'm sort of calling back to the fact that the slips of paper refer back to the names of students. So I'm putting that back into context. So if you're describing how to take a random sample with slips of paper, this is a really good way to do that. Our final guy here is your random number generator on a calculator. And this one is the easiest to explain, and it's going to be a little difficult to show you because I can't, because TI's computer simulator or calculator simulator for this computer is not free. So I'm going to describe it to you. Good luck to us all. So random number generator on the calculator goes like this. Same as everything else, I'm going to number students. From 1 to 37. And then all I have to say here is I'm going to use a calculator, random number generator, to select 5 numbers between 1 and 37. And again, my calculator, as you're going to see, can produce repeated numbers. So I'm just going to mention that I'm going to skip repeats. And then in this case, the selected numbers will represent the 5 students in the sample. Okay. So how do we do that on a calculator? Well, assuming you have a TI-84, if you don't have a TI-84, you have a phone, Google how to do this. TI-84s, here we go. So calculator instructions, here's how you, oh no, hold on, pause, what happened? Going back down, here we go. Okay, so calculator instructions. Okay, so right underneath your alpha button, that should be the green button, you're going to see a button that just says math. Press the math button. And then you are going to scroll to the right all the way to where it says prob. And some of yours, if you have an older calculator, it's going to say PRB. My calculator says PROB, but prob, that's what you're looking for. And when you get to prob, you are then going to scroll down, and you're going to scroll down. You're going to see a bunch of rands. That stands for random. You're going to scroll down to number 5, which is rand int. And that stands for random integer. So you're going to press enter, and some of your calculators are going to give you a menu option, and some of yours will just give you rand int with a parenthesis. So if yours has a menu option, in the lower, that's going to be your lower number. So I want numbers between 1 and 37, so my lower number will be 1. So you would type in 1. My upper number, which should be my next guy, oopsie, this pen. My upper number is going to be 37. And then the n, the last thing that it wants is n tells you how many numbers you want to take at a time. But there's an issue. I want 5 random numbers here, but my calculator doesn't know that it's supposed to skip repeats. And so what I typically do is if I need 5 numbers, I'm just going to pick them one at a time. So for my last guy, for my n, I'm just going to pick 1. And then I'm going to close the parentheses. So if you don't have the lower, upper, and n, you would just write rand int, or it would show up on your calculator, 1, 37, 1. And then you would press enter, and it should show you rand int 1, 37, 1. And if you press enter, it should spit out a random number. So my first random number that it spit out was 16. Yours may be different. In fact, if you have a brand new, you bought this calculator yourself, all of you who bought your calculator yourself this year, if you've never used this before, will have the same numbers for a while. And then if you press enter again, it should spit out a different random number. So mine, example, mine spit out 16, and then 15, and then 25, oopsie, and then 18. Oh my gosh, this awesome computer. Okay, pause. Scrolling back down. Okay, there we go. There we go. So we have 16, I had 15, 25, 18, and then my last one was 28. So I didn't have to skip any repeats. But that's how your random calculator, random integer function works. Also, coincidentally, that's how I pick random numbers, how I pick random volunteers for various things as well. Okay. So at this point, we're going to pause. You have an example below that's going to essentially ask you how to do what we just did, but with someone else's classroom with various names, and how to explain how you would do that using both a random number table, a random number, oh wait, no, wrong one. Haha, just kidding. So this is going to ask you how to do just with a random number table. That's right. So looking at this example, I want you to go through, read it, do part A and B using line 107 from your table, pause this video, and then when you're ready, you can play it again and check to see how your problem matches mine. And if it does, sweet. If not, we can fix that. Okay? So go ahead and go ahead and start working on example 2. And when you're ready, you can play the video and check your answers. Oh my gosh. I'm going to punch this calculator. Write it first from my calculator and my computer. Okay. All right. So, sorry, forgive the screen at this moment. This is horrific. Yeah, this computer's awesome. I love it. It's great. Okay. So, a couple of things. Let's just talk through here then. Okay, that'll do. So first assign students' names and number from 1 to 40. Choose a line from the random number table. In this case, they're going to make you choose line 207 later. Then choose numbers 2 digits at a time. Skip values less than 0, 1 and greater than 40. Skip repeats. Keep picking digits until 5 numbers have been chosen. These 5 numbers represent the 5 students in the sample. And then I'm not going to scroll down because my computer's being stupid. But if you use line 107 from your sample, you should end up with the numbers 20, 11, 38, 31, and 7. Now, I actually numbered my my students vertically. It really does not matter at all how you numbered your students. So if you did horizontally like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then kept going down, no big deal. But for my particular sample, I ended up with those 5 values. So 7, 11, which you can't see, 20, 31, and 38. So the last thing I would do is I would actually write down the numbers and the people that I got. So I would say 20, 11, 38, 31, and 7. And then I would actually say who these people represented. Okay. So Johnson, Drazen in my case. And yours might be totally different, and that is totally fine as long as you used roughly the same process. Washburn, Ryder, and Callaway. Okay. All right, folks. So that is how random selection works. You guys, for the next couple of days, are going to now explore different types of random sampling. Simple random samples are sort of the most basic type. And so you guys are going to look at a couple of other types of random sampling that are used quite often. All right, have a lovely day.